At first, it feels like a barrier, something that stops us, tests us, slows us down. But every fence also reminds us of something deeper. There is another side.
Welcome to Table Talk, a 12-step journey with Nick Robinson.
Welcome back to the conversation. I'm Nick Robinson, and today we are beginning a series on recovery. Here at the conversation, we talk about real life issues that affect real life people. And the process of recovery and it as a response to addiction is everywhere in our communities, wherever we live, whatever lives we practice. You probably know somebody in recovery, even if you don't know that they are in recovery. And so as part of talking about real life issues for real people, we're going to spend quite a few episodes in this series breaking down recovery, looking at it from the perspective of the 12 steps. What are they? How do they work? What does someone on that journey expect? How can we, if we are not somebody who maybe is in recovery, be supportive or even just know a little bit more about recovery so we can be faithful citizens in our communities? Today, I'm joined by Rick Lanham, and he is our expert. I today am the learner. I have not a lot of experience in this area, so I have a lot of questions, and I really want to know more. Rick, why don't you introduce yourself to us?
Okay, my name's Rick, and I wouldn't call myself an expert. I would simply call myself another person in recovery who is on this journey. That's the easiest way to say it, because it's not a destination. It is just that, a journey. So you said you had a lot of questions, so I'm just here to answer questions more than anything.
Well, absolutely. And thank you for being honest with us about your journey. I think part of the goal of this is for people to become more comfortable hearing about and talking about recovery, to try to demystify and destigmatize it so people are more willing to embrace the recovery process, because there's a lot of people who might find it intimidating or fearful to start the process. How did you get involved in recovery, Rick?
First off, I had to come to accept the reality that I needed to recover from something. And I think that's the biggest hurdle for most people, is realizing that there's something inside of them from history or from their past that needs to be dealt with. We get so used to who we are and what we are that it becomes normalized, and we just accept, well, that's just the way I am. And so that acceptance of that just becomes standardized. And so that bar gets set, and then we just get to a place, well, I'm just going to have to live with that. And so when we get to a place where we just live with that, we start to realize that chaos is okay. And so we get into recovery, or somebody says, like, we eventually will start to get into step. Our lives have become unmanageable, and unmanageable is normal. That was kind of where I was. But to give you a little bit of a background, I grew up in pretty much a regular, normal Midwestern home down in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Grew up in church, went to church pretty much whenever the doors were open. Great Christian family, mom, dad, grandparents, we all went to the same place. I had lots of opportunities to do lots of wonderful things. It was like Leave It to Beaver, Happy Days, everything was great.
Yeah, so you grew up in a happy household, faith-based, maybe not the start of your recovery journey. It's not, and it's not the beginning that so many people picture.
Right.
If you're operating only on stereotypes or assumptions about people who are in recovery, people might not picture a beginning like yours.
Well, no, and they might think there was, they would assume that it might look like something that you would see on a TV show where it was dysfunctional and it was chaos and it was confusion, and it wasn't that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, they're
typical-
picturing the wrong TV show. They should be picturing Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah, exactly. And, junior high hit, and it was the typical thing that you might think would happen. I was 12 years old, had my first drink. But I remember that the sensation of having the alcohol hit my system and the warm feelings, and then all of a sudden I liked it.
Yeah.
And it was like Mikey commercial on the Life. Hey,
Yeah.
Mikey, let's try it. Hey, Mikey, he likes it. He likes it. And so then all of a sudden that feeling, but just like with, infants, infants very early on learn two things. They learn to say mama, they learn to say daddy, and then they learn to say more. So that was my instinct, was
Yeah.
for more. And so that grew. And then the whole party scene throughout high school, yada, 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 yada. So there's a lot that then went into that through college, through then even into grad school. But my grad school was Indiana University, but then it was seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And I studied to become a pastor.
Yeah.
But I had two faces. I had one in the world and a foot in ministry. And so I continued to have this dual life. And there was this knowledge life of scripture, but there was this torn side, like Paul said, I have in Romans 7, the things that I want to do, I hate. The things that I don't want to do, I do. So I had this tension going on inside of me. Yes, I can watch a YouTube video on how to change an oil in my engine, but you don't want me touching your car. You're the last. So just because I know what to do doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to do it.
Yeah.
So for a long, long time, I had this war going on inside of Rick.
And what brought you to the point where you were ready to say, I need to do this war differently. I need to address this differently and maybe start this process of recovery?
My marriage was not solid.
Hmm.
There were some things that were going on inside the home. And so my wife said, I don't want to be a preacher's wife anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I knew something was going on at that particular time. I was in the middle of a small church at the particular time. I'd been in several churches, and I was also working a consulting job, so it was dual income. And I had scheduled out for a lunch meeting and lunch, which was a lie. So I drove 45 minutes to a small little town to get away from the big city. I was living in Indianapolis at the time. And so I drove 45 minutes out of town to go to an AA meeting, actually. And I walked into this as my first meeting. It was January of 2000. So it was 26 years ago.
Wow.
And so I drove to this little meeting, and I walked into this AA meeting. I took off my coat, loosened my tie, rolled up my sleeves, trying to be incognito, this businessman from the big city, 45 minutes away. And I walked in, and I sat down in this meeting, and I looked up in a room of about 20 people, and there was a pastor from a church 3 blocks away from me sitting in a room.
Yeah.
We both looked up at each other. We kind of had a holy crap moment
Well,
at the same time.
And what a witness to people are fighting greater battles than we know when
Right.
we meet them. We don't know someone's background story. We don't know where they are in life that day.
Right.
And like, what a reminder to see another person who I assume presented themselves differently outside of that room.
Well, and the amazing thing too is when you asked me to do this series with you, I was thinking about the fact that we're pretty much everyone that I've ever met is struggling with something.
Yeah.
And recovery has such a connotation to it because people think, well, I'm not an addict and I don't need recovery. They all automatically think it has to do with either drug addiction or alcoholism.
Well, that's a great introduction to our next step. But I want to ask you one more question
Okay.
before we get there.
That's fair enough.
So you started this journey on recovery. Can you give us a brief synopsis of what this recovery's been like? In that, I believe you have some certifications and some training, and so you started as a newbie, and now you operate differently in that space. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I do, because I made the assumption, and a lot of people made the assumption, well, how did a pastor with seminary degrees in New Testament and counseling and Old Testament master's degrees end up as an addict? And one of the first questions that I asked them was, well, what do you do for a living? They said, I'm a plumber. I'm an electrician. I'm an attorney. And I said, well, how did a plumber or an electrician or an attorney end up as an addict? And they go, oh, well, first off, at least with alcoholism or drug addiction, those don't ask you what your degree is in. They don't ask you, you know, what your culture is, what your skin color is. Those are issues that they have no barriers. Yeah. It's like people that have anger issues, people that have eating disorders, people that get addicted to pornography. Once that obsession, whatever that obsession is, takes over, it goes back to the kid that just wants more. It starts to feed, and all you're doing is whatever that feeling is, that you don't want that feeling, so you use something to take away the feeling that you're having.
Absolutely.
And so then you mask that feeling, that sadness, that aloneness, with something else. Mm-hmm. It's replacement therapy. So I realized that, well, I couldn't cover up my smartness with a degree with something from the Bible or something from counseling with a feeling, because I would do that and mask it, but the next morning I'd wake up, I'd still feel it that way. And then I would have guilt, I would have shame, and I'd still feel the same feeling that I had. People that do, I need something to replace it. So they do online shopping. Well, the next morning they wake up and they still have the same feeling, but now they've got less money in their account. Yeah. And they go, where are the funds? Oh no, yep. I just spent my kids' lunch money, so it's just becomes this vicious cycle that spins around them. So then all of a sudden I said, I need to rethink. I need to learn to think differently. Mm-hmm. So I got certified as a life coach. I got certified as a mindfulness coach. I took the course as a recovery coach, a peer recovery coach, and all of a sudden, those became, at least in that community, became much more reliable and meaningful than any of the academics that I had. On the other hand, people say, well, the word recovery in and of itself has connotations. But, for instance, this is kind of, give me just a second to lay some framework for you. In technology, mm-hmm. like your laptop, for instance, if it goes down and it gets really bad, it has to be rebooted. Mm-hmm. Reboot means it was booted once before. So you reboot it to take it back to its original space. If I've worked in the farm, or I've worked out, or I've been in the garden or something, and I take a shower, I go, oh, that was refreshing. That means I was fresh once before. Now I'm going to get refreshed. It's like a glass of iced tea. It's so refreshing. So in recovery, it means at some point in time, I was covered. Everything was good. It's like the grace of Jesus Christ. I was covered. I was in relationship at one point. God had me where he wanted me. But because of something that I had done, something in my relationship, something in my thinking, something in my attitude, it pulled me away. And that's what addiction does. It separates my spirituality, it separates my emotions, it separates my connectivity. So that's a great word. My connection gets lost. So what do? We plug it back. We reconnect. And so that's what recovery is about. It covers us back. It's the verse. Romans 11:11. I love the way it reads in the NIV. It says, have these stumbled so far as to be beyond recovery? By no means. So there are programs, there are cycles and sequences like the 12 steps that teach us one by one how to gradually get ourselves back and to restore. Means it was stored somewhere once before. We were stored. We were held in the palm of God's hands. It restores that fellowship.
Yeah. Well, let's stop there and take a short break here, and we'll come back with more on recovery. Hi, I'm Nick Robinson. Have you ever wondered how many of the professional athletes you see on TV have a relationship with God? On the Conversation Community this month, I'll be talking with Tom Rust, founder and creator of Face to Face, a ministry that follows high-profile athletes who take their faith seriously within the world of sports. For more than 30 years, Tom has talked and prayed with some of the most famous athletes of our generation. Don't miss this powerful conversation, only on the Conversation Community. All right, Rick. One, I want to say thank you for saying yes to being part of this conversation, but I'm also curious, what made you say yes to talking about this? I mean, this is a public forum. It can't be easy to sit around and tell your story and talk about, the sensitive topic in front of what could be a lot of people. What made you say yes?
I had some people that said yes to me when I was at probably some of the worst, most difficult times of my life. They took the time to tell me some truths I really didn't want to hear. Yeah. They stood by me when they didn't have to. And I figured it was time for me to tell my story. And if one or two people, it helps them and they say, okay, it's my time. I really need to do something different. Yeah. That's why.
Well, and it strikes me that recovery is really personal in several different ways. Like you are, everyone has a different background story. Everyone has a different story of how they began and how, where addiction started for them and then where recovery started for them and how they worked through the process. But it's also personal because it's an inside work that we're doing. It's not work that someone else can do on our behalf, but it's about personal change. And then it's also personal because people are involved in this process for you and with you, and sometimes as helps and sometimes as hindrances. And so I think the next question that I want to ask is like, who is recovery for? I often think of alcohol or hard drugs. Who else might benefit from being in recovery?
I think ultimately we have, at least I've observed that initially everybody seems to think their story is unique because they're comparing.
Yeah.
I did. I initially walked in and said, well, I'm not as bad as that guy.
Yeah. A lot of people will put off getting help because they're not as bad as someone else.
Well, because when I first started, I hadn't gone through a divorce. I hadn't lost my house. I hadn't wrecked my car. I hadn't gone to jail yet. But as you know, I sat in the rooms and I listened to people talk. However, because I didn't think I was as bad as them, I didn't listen as intently as I should have. the 12 step ends with, and we practice these principles in all of our affairs. And so because I was comparing, I was only applying the principles to some of my affairs.
Yeah.
Therefore, I was not getting the full benefit. And so I didn't get the full benefit. And so eventually I did lose my car. I did experience a divorce. I did go to jail. So all of those things. So,
And this was after you had started the recovery process.
This was
So
after-
recovery is not a silver bullet to fix things.
well, and I
Right
won't
away.
even say it was after I started recovery.
Okay.
It's one thing to stop a behavior.
Mhm.
It's another thing to change.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's you can stop doing something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've changed your attitude, changed your way of thinking, changed your lifestyle. You've just stopped doing a thing.
So is it fair to say that addiction might be for somebody who's facing a thing in their life that is negatively impacting, their living? So it could be shopping, it could be anger, it could be a whole list of things. It's not just hard drugs and alcohol and things like that.
Oh, absolutely. They could be experience, and it could be something that comes up later because they've stopped drinking, but that doesn't mean that they don't still have anger issues. Depression is something that goes much deeper than just whether or not I can cry at the drop of a hat, or I sleep in late, or I don't want to. I just don't feel like making my bed, or I want to keep the curtains closed during the day when it's a bright, sunny day. That would be one. Or how I manage my finances, or how I put things off to the last minute because procrastination is an issue, and it's a chronic thing as opposed to something that just occasionally happens. So there's lots of things that
Well, I mean, and as you list some of these issues, I'm a chronic procrastinator. Sometimes
we should
I'm
talk about that
depressed.
tomorrow.
And so I'm hearing, as you talk about recovery and the benefits of these 12 steps, I'm hearing that it's not just for this kind of person or that kind of person, but even if you start recovery for one reason, you might find other things and that you need to change as you're going through the process. Like you say, it's not just stopping a behavior, but it's really changing who we are.
Right.
And as a pastor coming to this, one of the things that it just reminds me so much of is a discipleship process.
Oh.
Here at the conversation it's about faith and real life. And I think if you want to follow Jesus more closely, you could strongly benefit from looking at these 12 steps. So as someone who's ready, okay, they've identified an issue in their life. Maybe it is alcohol or narcotics, or maybe it is shopping. How do you go about getting help in the beginning? Like, how does someone start that journey?
There's a number of different. The first thing I would do is to look for a meeting. Any
kind.
Any kind.
Yeah. 'Cause
Anything.
we're not here to promote any certain kind of type of meeting, but there are meetings that go through these steps together.
Sure. Well, I would start with anything that's 12-step based.
Okay.
Because the 12 steps were originally written based off the book of James, the Sermon on the Mount, and 1 Corinthians 13 from its core, which is obviously a great place to start.
Absolutely.
But anything that's 12-step based, there's lots of programs that are out there that are written from that. Not to promote any specific one, but that would be AA, HA, CA, NA, Overeaters Anonymous. You can find those just by looking up on.
Yeah.
You can Google those.
Can you call 211? Would they?
You could do that. You
Yeah.
could also, you can just get online and just type in 12-step meetings and find them. I know that in Columbus, basically there's 55 different kinds of meetings per week
Wow.
that
Yeah.
you can select. You can also look up Celebrate Recovery, which is a faith-based 12-step program that uses 8 principles. There are 5 different Celebrate Recoveries in Columbus. There's 8 that include Seymour, Franklin, Edinburgh area that meet. on any given week in the metropolitan metro.
So there
Columbus
are
area.
resources out there.
Yes.
There
So
are
if somebody
plenty of
says
places
they
to go.
can't find a meeting, it's
No.
because they haven't really explored it and looked into it.
So say I find a meeting and I go to it. How often should I expect to go to meetings?
If you're in trouble with the law, they're going to tell you to go to 90 meetings in 90 days,
Okay.
which is fantastic. On a discipleship basis, I mean, how often do you eat?
Yeah.
Is the question. Do you want to get fed? How consistent? It's kind of like the John 5 passage when Jesus walked into the guy by the pool of Siloam, and he says, "Do you Bethesda? I mean, do you want to get well?" That's the question. Jesus didn't stay with the guy by the muck and the mire. He said, "Do you want to get well? Pick up your mat, follow me, do the work."
Well, and I think that goes beyond some people's expectations to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I think that sounds like a lot.
Right.
Like, from a pastor's perspective, can I imagine telling someone you should go to 90 Bible studies
Right.
in 90 days, which sounds like a huge commitment, but also think about the difference that could make in someone's life. Like,
Right.
especially if you're new to this and you start, okay, now I have this consistency. Now I have this practice. Now I've gone deep in several different places. I've kind of drank from the fire hose for a
Right.
season, but also given my life that structure to keep this thing that's important to me in front of me. I do want to get well, and here are the things I'm doing
Right.
to get better.
The flip side to that is once somebody gets into a program and they have a sponsor, the expectation is at least call and talk to your sponsor once a day. Call them on the phone or send them a text. On a discipleship model, I wouldn't call for them to actually meet face to face. But if I had somebody that I was discipling and I said, call me once a day, text me once a day, let's just touch base and make sure that you're tracking. Are you praying? Have you been in the Word once a day?
Yeah.
That's discipleship right there, like we were talking about.
And then, so you mentioned sponsors.
Mhm.
So if someone starts recovery, what is a sponsor? Who is it? What do they do? What's their role? What's a sponsor?
The primary role of a sponsor is to have somebody who carries you and takes you and walks you through the steps.
Okay.
That's their job.
Okay. Speaking of the steps, we're going to wrap up today's conversation.
Okay.
And that leads us right into where we're going to go next week. Next week, or our next conversation, maybe not next week, but our next conversation is going to be about step 1.
Okay.
And we're going to go through a series going through steps 1 through 12 and talking about them. And we're going to bring in people who are on this journey of recovery, who are going to tell us about the steps and how it's gone for them and which ones were the hardest. And we're going to try to cultivate this wisdom of people who have lived real life with real faith. So I want to thank you today, and I want to thank you for joining us for the conversation. And we'll see you next time as we keep talking, we keep following God.